Question 1. Operational review demonstrates that a senior manager at Mitsubishi Motors has recently acquired a significant personal investment in a key supplier company. This investment is substantial enough that it could reasonably influence the manager's judgment when negotiating contracts or making procurement decisions for Mitsubishi Motors. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for this senior manager? Option A. Immediately disclose the personal investment and potential conflict of interest to the designated compliance officer or supervisor. Option B. Inform close colleagues about the investment to ensure they are aware, but do not formally report it. Option C. Downplay the significance of the investment to themselves and proceed with their duties without formal notification. Option D. Continue to manage procurement decisions as usual, believing their professional integrity will prevent any bias. The correct answer is A. Immediately disclose the personal investment and potential conflict of interest to the designated compliance officer or supervisor. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Mitsubishi Motors due to the potential for a conflict of interest. Employees are expected to act in the best interests of the company, and personal financial interests that could influence professional judgment must be carefully managed. The challenge lies in identifying and addressing such conflicts proactively and transparently, ensuring that decisions remain objective and aligned with Mitsubishi Motors' ethical standards and any applicable regulatory requirements. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves immediate disclosure of the potential conflict of interest to the relevant authority within Mitsubishi Motors. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and ethical conduct, which typically mandate transparency when personal interests could reasonably be perceived to influence professional duties. By disclosing, the employee allows Mitsubishi Motors to assess the situation, implement appropriate safeguards, such as recusal from specific decisions, or determine if the situation poses an unacceptable risk. This proactive step upholds the integrity of business dealings and demonstrates a commitment to ethical practices, which is often reinforced by internal company policies and potentially by broader regulatory expectations regarding employee conduct and conflicts of interest. Incorrect approaches analysis. Failing to disclose the potential conflict of interest is a significant ethical and potentially regulatory failure. It undermines trust, creates an environment where decisions might be compromised, and can lead to reputational damage for Mitsubishi Motors. This approach violates the fundamental principle of acting in the company's best interest and can contravene internal codes of conduct and any applicable regulations that require disclosure of such situations. Attempting to manage the conflict independently without disclosure is also professionally unacceptable. Bypasses established procedures designed to ensure objectivity and fairness. This approach risks making decisions that are biased, even if unintentionally, and leaves Mitsubishi Motors vulnerable to accusations of impropriety or unfair dealing. It demonstrates a lack of understanding of corporate responsibility and the importance of oversight. Minimizing the significance of the potential conflict to colleagues without formal disclosure is insufficient. While it might seem like a casual way to address the issue, it does not provide the necessary formal record or allow for a proper assessment by the company. This approach can lead to misunderstandings and does not fulfill the obligation to formally report and manage conflicts of interest, potentially leaving Mitsubishi Motors exposed to risks. Professional reasoning. Professionals at Mitsubishi Motors should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, adherence to company policy, and ethical conduct. When faced with a situation that could present a conflict of interest, the first step should always be to consult the company's code of conduct or ethics policy. If a potential conflict is identified, the immediate and mandatory action is to disclose it to the designated supervisor or compliance department. This allows the company to formally assess the situation and implement appropriate mitigation strategies, ensuring that business decisions are made impartially and in the best interests of Mitsubishi Motors. Question 2. The audit findings indicate a recurring issue with the accuracy of inventory valuation data at Mitsubishi Motors' primary distribution center. Which of the following approaches best addresses this situation from a risk assessment perspective? Option A. Temporarily reduce the frequency of inventory counts to minimize operational disruption while the issue is investigated. Option B. Focus on immediate cost-saving measures by renegotiating supplier contracts, as the inventory valuation issue is a minor operational detail. Option C. Implement a new automated inventory tracking system to improve data integrity and reduce manual entry errors. Option D. Conduct a detailed root cause analysis of the inventory valuation discrepancies and develop a targeted remediation plan based on the findings. The correct answer is C. Implement a new automated inventory tracking system to improve data integrity and reduce manual entry errors. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires Mitsubishi Motors to balance operational efficiency with robust risk management, particularly in the context of potential regulatory scrutiny. The audit findings highlight a gap that could expose the company to financial penalties, reputational damage, and operational disruptions if not addressed proactively. Careful judgment is required to select an approach that is both effective in mitigating the identified risk and compliant with relevant regulations. The correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that not only identifies the root cause of the audit findings, but also evaluates the potential impact and likelihood of recurrence. This approach is right because it aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and regulatory compliance, which mandate proactive risk identification and mitigation. Specifically, it demonstrates a commitment to internal control effectiveness and a responsible approach to managing business operations, which are often implicitly or explicitly required by regulatory frameworks governing automotive manufacturers and publicly traded companies. This systematic evaluation ensures that resources are allocated effectively to address the most significant risks. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate cost reduction without understanding the underlying risk factors is professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the potential long-term consequences, which could lead to repeated audit findings or more severe issues. It also fails to meet the ethical obligation to maintain sound internal controls and manage the business responsibly. Another incorrect approach that involves deferring the remediation of the audit findings due to resource constraints, without a clear plan or justification, is also professionally unsound. This demonstrates poor prioritization and a potential violation of internal policies or regulatory expectations that require timely resolution of identified control weaknesses. It signals a lack of commitment to risk management and could be interpreted as negligence. Finally, an approach that involves implementing a superficial fix without addressing the systemic issues identified by the audit is professionally inadequate. This approach fails to achieve genuine risk reduction and leaves Mitsubishi Motors vulnerable to future problems. It represents a superficial engagement with the audit process and a missed opportunity for meaningful improvement. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Thoroughly understanding the audit findings and their implications. 2. Conducting a detailed risk assessment to identify root causes, potential impacts, and likelihood. 3. Evaluating potential mitigation strategies based on their effectiveness, cost, and feasibility. 4. Consulting relevant internal policies, procedures, and external regulatory requirements. 5. Developing a clear action plan with defined responsibilities, timelines, and performance metrics. 6. Communicating the plan and progress to relevant stakeholders. 7. Regularly reviewing and updating the risk assessment and mitigation strategies. Question 3. Cost-benefit analysis shows that launching a new vehicle model in the Australian market within the next quarter could yield significant revenue for Mitsubishi Motors. However, preliminary assessments indicate potential minor noncompliance with specific Australian design rules, ADR, related to exhaust emissions, which could be rectified post-launch with a software update. What is the most professionally responsible course of action for the product development team? Option A. Launch the vehicle with a disclaimer acknowledging the potential emissions noncompliance, relying on consumer understanding to mitigate regulatory scrutiny. Option B. Proceed with the launch as planned, with a commitment to implement the necessary software update shortly after market release to address the ADR noncompliance. Option C. Delay the launch until all identified ADR compliance issues are fully resolved and verified by the relevant Australian authorities, even if this impacts the projected revenue timeline. Option D. Expedite the approval process by submitting the current design, assuming minor noncompliance will be overlooked by regulatory bodies given the potential economic benefits. The correct answer is B. Proceed with the launch as planned, with a commitment to implement the necessary software updates shortly after market release to address the ADR noncompliance. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Mitsubishi Motors employee tasked with evaluating a new product launch. The core difficulty lies in balancing the potential financial benefits of a rapid market entry against the imperative to adhere to regulatory compliance and ethical business practices. The pressure to achieve financial targets can create a temptation to overlook or downplay potential risks, making objective assessment and sound judgment critical. The company's reputation and long-term sustainability are at stake, necessitating a decision that prioritizes integrity over short-term gains. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves prioritizing thorough due diligence and regulatory compliance, even if it delays the product launch and potentially impacts immediate profitability. This aligns with the fundamental principles of responsible corporate conduct and regulatory frameworks governing product safety and market entry. Specifically, it upholds the ethical obligation to ensure products are safe and meet all legal requirements before reaching consumers. This proactive stance minimizes the risk of future recalls, fines, lawsuits, and reputational damage, ultimately serving the best interests of Mitsubishi Motors and its stakeholders. Adherence to established procedures and a commitment to transparency are paramount. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that prioritizes immediate market entry by expediting the approval process without fully addressing identified compliance gaps is professionally unacceptable. This would constitute a failure to uphold regulatory obligations, potentially exposing Mitsubishi Motors to significant legal penalties and consumer harm. It demonstrates a disregard for ethical business practices and a willingness to compromise integrity for financial expediency. Another incorrect approach would be to proceed with the launch based on an assumption that minor compliance issues will be resolved post-launch. This is a risky and unethical strategy that places consumers at risk and undermines the credibility of the company's quality control and regulatory adherence. It signals a lack of commitment to robust internal processes and a potential for recurring problems. Finally, an approach that involves selectively reporting or downplaying the severity of compliance issues to management to push for a faster launch is a severe ethical breach. This misrepresents the true state of affairs, prevents informed decision-making, and actively obstructs the company's ability to act responsibly. It erodes trust within the organization and exposes Mitsubishi Motors to severe consequences. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of all applicable regulatory requirements and internal company policies. They must then conduct a comprehensive risk assessment, identifying potential compliance issues and their implications. The next step is to communicate these findings transparently and objectively to relevant stakeholders, including management. The decision should be guided by a commitment to ethical conduct and long-term sustainability, even if it means delaying short-term objectives. If there is any doubt about compliance, the prudent course of action is to seek clarification, conduct further investigation, or halt the process until all concerns are satisfactorily resolved. Question 4. The performance metrics show a significant downturn in sales for the latest quarter, impacting profitability projections for Mitsubishi Motors. A senior executive suggests focusing the upcoming investor report solely on the successful launch of a new electric vehicle model, which has shown promising early adoption rates, while briefly mentioning the overall sales dip as a minor, temporary fluctuation. What is the most ethically and regulatorily sound approach for Mitsubishi Motors to take in preparing its investor report? Option A. Focus exclusively on the positive aspects of the new electric vehicle launch, omitting any mention of the overall sales downturn to avoid alarming investors and potentially impacting the company's stock price. Option B. Present a balanced report that clearly outlines the overall sales downturn, provides context for its causes, and also highlights the positive performance of the new electric vehicle model, ensuring all figures are accurate and presented transparently. Option C. Emphasize the success of the new electric vehicle model and its positive early adoption rates, while downplaying the overall sales downturn and attributing it to external, uncontrollable factors without providing specific data. Option D. Delay the release of the investor report until further sales data can be gathered, hoping that the positive impact of the new electric vehicle will begin to offset the current negative sales trends. The correct answer is B. Present a balanced report that clearly outlines the overall sales downturn, provides context for its causes, and also highlights the positive performance of the new electric vehicle model, ensuring all figures are accurate and presented transparently. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate financial pressures of a company with its long-term ethical and regulatory obligations. Mitsubishi Motors, like any publicly traded entity, operates under a framework of regulations designed to ensure fair disclosure and prevent market manipulation. The temptation to present a more favorable, albeit misleading, picture of performance to appease stakeholders or secure future funding is a common ethical pitfall. However, adherence to regulatory requirements for accurate financial reporting is paramount. The correct approach involves transparently reporting the performance metrics as they are, even if they are disappointing. This aligns with the principles of corporate governance and regulatory compliance, which mandate truthful and accurate financial disclosures. Specifically, regulations governing public companies, assuming Mitsubishi Motors operates under such frameworks, e.g., UK Financial Conduct Authority rules or U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission regulations, require that all material information, positive or negative, be disclosed to investors in a timely and accurate manner. Failing to do so can lead to severe penalties, reputational damage, and loss of investor confidence. An incorrect approach would be to selectively highlight positive aspects while downplaying or omitting negative ones. This constitutes misleading reporting and can be construed as market manipulation or a breach of disclosure obligations. Such an action erodes trust and can lead to legal repercussions. Another incorrect approach would be to delay the release of the performance metrics in the hope that future performance will offset current shortfalls. This can also be a violation of disclosure timelines and can be seen as an attempt to artificially influence market perception. Finally, fabricating or altering performance data to present a rosier picture is outright fraud and carries the most severe legal and ethical consequences. Professionals facing such situations should follow a structured decision-making process. 1. Identify the core issue. Is there a conflict between immediate pressures and ethical/regulatory duties? 2. Consult relevant regulations and internal policies. Understand the specific disclosure requirements and ethical guidelines applicable to Mitsubishi Motors. 3. Seek advice. If unsure, consult with legal counsel, compliance officers, or senior management. 4. Prioritize transparency and accuracy. Ensure all disclosures are truthful, complete, and timely. 5. Document decisions. Maintain records of the decision-making process and the rationale behind the chosen course of action. Question 5. Governance review demonstrates that a department within Mitsubishi Motors is proposing a significant cost-saving initiative by reclassifying certain operational expenditures as one-off restructuring costs. This reclassification would immediately improve the department's reported profitability for the current fiscal period, thereby meeting internal performance targets. However, the nature of these expenditures does not strictly align with the established criteria for restructuring costs under applicable accounting standards, and the proposed reclassification lacks comprehensive supporting documentation. The department head is advocating for this approach to avoid scrutiny over their budget performance. What is the most appropriate course of action for Mitsubishi Motors management to take in response to this proposal? Option A. Allow the reclassification but require the department to conduct a more thorough internal review to find additional justifications, even if those justifications are not fully compliant with accounting standards, to support the proposed change. Option B. Implement the reclassification as proposed, but issue a general internal memo to all departments reminding them of the importance of accurate financial reporting, without specifically addressing the current proposal's compliance issues. Option C. Reject the proposed reclassification due to its lack of strict adherence to accounting standards and insufficient supporting documentation, and instruct the department to find alternative, compliant cost-saving measures or to report actual expenditures. Option D. Approve the reclassification of expenditures as proposed by the department head to achieve the immediate cost savings and meet performance targets, with a commitment to rectify any minor discrepancies in future reporting. Correct answer is D. Approve the reclassification of expenditures as proposed by the department head to achieve the immediate cost savings and meet performance targets, with a commitment to rectify any minor discrepancies in future reporting. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for cost savings with the long-term implications of compromising ethical standards and regulatory compliance. Mitsubishi Motors, as a global entity, is subject to various regulatory frameworks, and adherence to these is paramount for maintaining trust, avoiding penalties, and ensuring sustainable business operations. The pressure to reduce expenses can create a conflict between financial objectives and ethical responsibilities, demanding careful judgment and a robust decision-making process. The correct approach involves prioritizing the integrity of the reporting process and adhering strictly to the established accounting standards and internal controls. This means ensuring that all financial data accurately reflects the company's performance, even if it means forgoing immediate cost reduction opportunities that are not compliant. This approach is right because it upholds the principles of transparency, accuracy, and accountability, which are fundamental to good corporate governance and regulatory compliance. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of financial reporting integrity expected under relevant accounting standards, e.g., IFRS or US GAAP, depending on the specific jurisdiction applicable to Mitsubishi Motors reporting, and the ethical duties of directors and officers to act in the best interests of the company and its stakeholders, which includes providing truthful financial information. An incorrect approach would be to implement the proposed cost-saving measure by reclassifying expenses without proper justification or documentation. This is professionally unacceptable because it constitutes financial misrepresentation, potentially violating accounting standards and securities regulations. Such an action could lead to inaccurate financial statements, misleading investors and stakeholders, and expose Mitsubishi Motors to significant legal and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the governance review's findings and proceed with the cost-saving measure without further investigation or consultation. This demonstrates a disregard for internal controls and ethical oversight, which is a failure of due diligence. It suggests a lack of commitment to compliance and could be interpreted as a deliberate attempt to circumvent established procedures for personal or departmental gain, undermining the company's overall governance framework. A third incorrect approach would be to implement the cost-saving measure, but only after a superficial review that does not adequately assess the regulatory implications. This is also professionally unacceptable, as it indicates a failure to conduct a thorough risk assessment. While it might appear to address the cost-saving goal, it neglects the critical aspect of compliance, leaving Mitsubishi Motors vulnerable to future scrutiny and penalties. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Understand the core issue. Clearly identify the proposed action and its potential benefits and risks. 2. Consult relevant frameworks. Refer to applicable accounting standards, company policies, and any relevant regulatory guidelines. 3. Assess compliance. Determine if the proposed action adheres to all legal and ethical requirements. 4. Evaluate impact. Consider the short-term and long-term consequences on financial reporting, stakeholder trust, and company reputation. 5. Seek expert advice. If there is any doubt, consult with legal counsel, internal audit, or compliance departments. 6. Document decisions. Maintain clear records of the decision-making process and the rationale behind the chosen course of action. 7. Prioritize integrity. Always choose the path that upholds ethical principles and regulatory compliance, even if it means foregoing immediate financial gains. Question 6. Strategic planning requires Mitsubishi Motors to accurately forecast future sales. A regional manager instructs a subordinate to inflate projected sales figures for the upcoming quarter to meet ambitious targets, suggesting that creative accounting will be used to justify the numbers later. What is the most ethical and legally sound course of action for the subordinate? Option A. Ignore the manager's instruction and continue with their own, more conservative sales projections without informing anyone. Option B. Attempt to subtly adjust the figures to be more realistic without directly inflating them, hoping this will satisfy the manager without explicit misrepresentation. Option C. Proceed with inflating the sales figures as instructed, assuming the manager will handle any subsequent issues. Option D. Refuse to inflate the sales figures and immediately report the manager's instruction to Mitsubishi Motors Compliance Department or Ethics Hotline. The correct answer is C. Proceed with inflating the sales figures as instructed, assuming the manager will handle any subsequent issues. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Mitsubishi Motors employee because it involves a conflict between achieving business objectives and upholding ethical standards, specifically concerning accurate financial reporting and potential misrepresentation. The employee is placed in a position where pressure to meet targets could lead to compromising integrity. Careful judgment is required to navigate this situation without violating professional conduct or regulatory requirements. The correct approach involves immediately escalating the issue through the appropriate internal channels, such as the compliance department or a designated ethics hotline, and refusing to participate in the misrepresentation. This upholds the principle of integrity, a cornerstone of professional conduct, and aligns with regulatory frameworks that mandate accurate financial reporting and prohibit fraudulent activities. By reporting the concern, the employee acts as a whistleblower, fulfilling a professional and ethical duty to protect the company and its stakeholders from potential harm. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the misrepresentation as instructed. This directly violates ethical principles of honesty and integrity. Furthermore, it exposes the employee and Mitsubishi Motors to significant legal and regulatory penalties, including fines and reputational damage, under financial reporting laws. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the instruction and do nothing. While this avoids direct participation in the misrepresentation, it fails to address the underlying ethical breach and potential regulatory violation, leaving the company vulnerable and the employee complicit by inaction. Finally, attempting to subtly adjust figures without explicit instruction or justification, or seeking to fix the numbers without proper authorization, could also be seen as a breach of professional conduct and may still lead to inaccurate reporting, albeit through a different mechanism. Professionals facing similar situations should employ a structured decision-making process. First, identify the ethical and regulatory implications of the situation. Second, consult relevant company policies and codes of conduct. Third, seek guidance from internal compliance or legal departments. Fourth, document all communications and actions taken. Finally, prioritize integrity and adherence to regulations over short-term performance pressures. Question 7. The control framework reveals that a Mitsubishi Motors employee is responsible for evaluating bids for a new component supplier. The employee discovers that one of the bidding companies is owned by a close personal friend. What is the most appropriate course of action for the employee to ensure regulatory compliance and maintain ethical standards? Option A. Ignore the personal relationship and complete the evaluation as if no acquaintance exists, assuming objectivity will prevail. Option B. Discreetly advocate for the friend's company during internal discussions, highlighting their strengths without explicitly stating the personal connection. Option C. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to the Mitsubishi Motors compliance department and recuse themselves from the evaluation process. Option D. Proceed with the evaluation, ensuring the friend's bid is objectively assessed alongside others, without mentioning the relationship. The correct answer is C. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to the Mitsubishi Motors compliance department and recuse themselves from the evaluation process. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an employee of Mitsubishi Motors to navigate a situation where a potential conflict of interest could arise, impacting the integrity of procurement processes. The employee must exercise sound judgment to uphold ethical standards and regulatory compliance, ensuring fair competition and preventing undue influence. The correct approach involves proactively disclosing the personal relationship to the relevant internal compliance department or designated authority within Mitsubishi Motors. This action demonstrates transparency and allows the company to implement appropriate safeguards, such as recusal from decision-making processes related to the supplier or assigning oversight to an independent party. This aligns with general principles of corporate governance and ethical conduct expected of employees in regulated industries, emphasizing the importance of avoiding even the appearance of impropriety. While specific Mitsubishi Motors internal policies would dictate the exact procedure, the underlying principle is to manage potential conflicts of interest transparently and effectively. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the procurement process without disclosing the relationship. This failure to disclose creates a significant risk of actual or perceived bias, undermining the fairness and objectivity of the procurement. It violates ethical obligations to act in the best interest of the company and could lead to regulatory scrutiny if the procurement process is later found to be compromised. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to influence the decision-making process in favor of the acquaintance's company, even if the relationship is not formally disclosed. This constitutes a direct breach of ethical conduct and potentially company policy, as it prioritizes personal relationships over objective business criteria. Such actions can lead to reputational damage, financial loss for Mitsubishi Motors due to suboptimal supplier selection, and severe disciplinary action. A further incorrect approach would be to ignore the situation and hope it goes unnoticed. This passive stance is also professionally unacceptable, as it fails to address a known potential conflict of interest. It abdicates responsibility for upholding ethical standards and leaves the company vulnerable to the negative consequences of undisclosed conflicts. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, integrity, and adherence to company policy and ethical guidelines. When faced with a potential conflict of interest, the first step should always be to identify the conflict, assess its potential impact, and then consult relevant internal policies or compliance officers to determine the appropriate course of action, which typically involves disclosure and potential recusal. Question 8. The audit findings indicate that Mitsubishi Motors' current risk assessment framework may not fully encompass the nuances of the latest regulatory requirements. Which of the following approaches would be the most professionally sound and compliant method for addressing these findings? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive review of existing risk controls, identify specific gaps against the new regulatory requirements, and develop targeted mitigation strategies. Option B. Engage external consultants to overhaul the entire risk management system without significant internal involvement in the assessment phase. Option C. Perform a quick review of all relevant documentation to confirm that it superficially aligns with the new regulatory requirements. Option D. Immediately implement new controls based on a general understanding of the regulatory requirements without a detailed risk assessment. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive review of existing risk controls, identify specific gaps against the new regulatory requirements, and develop targeted mitigation strategies. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires Mitsubishi Motors' compliance team to balance the need for robust risk assessment with the practicalities of implementing new regulatory requirements. The challenge lies in identifying the most effective and compliant approach to integrate these requirements into existing risk management frameworks, ensuring that all potential risks are adequately identified, assessed, and mitigated without causing undue operational disruption. Careful judgment is required to select an approach that is both comprehensive and efficient. The correct approach involves a proactive and integrated strategy. This approach is right because it aligns with the principles of effective risk management and regulatory compliance, which emphasize foresight and systematic integration. By conducting a thorough review of existing risk controls and identifying gaps relative to the new regulatory framework, Mitsubishi Motors can ensure that its risk assessment process is updated to capture all relevant obligations. This systematic identification and assessment of risks, followed by the development of specific mitigation strategies, directly addresses the audit findings and demonstrates a commitment to compliance. This aligns with the general expectation of regulatory bodies that organizations maintain up-to-date and effective risk management systems. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on a superficial review of documentation fails because it does not involve a deep understanding of the practical application of controls. This superficiality can lead to a false sense of security, where documentation appears compliant but the actual processes are not. This poses a significant regulatory risk, as regulators expect demonstrable adherence to requirements, not just documented procedures. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate implementation without a proper risk assessment is also professionally unacceptable. This haste can lead to the overlooking of critical risks or the implementation of ineffective controls, potentially creating new compliance issues or operational vulnerabilities. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to adhere to the fundamental principles of risk management, which necessitate a thorough assessment before action. Finally, an approach that relies solely on external consultants without internal engagement is flawed. While consultants can provide valuable expertise, An over-reliance can lead to a disconnect between the implemented solutions and Mitsubishi Motors' internal operational realities. This can result in a compliance framework that is difficult to sustain internally and may not fully address the company's specific risk profile, potentially leading to future compliance failures. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, thoroughly understand the regulatory requirements and the audit findings. Second, assess the current state of risk management processes within Mitsubishi Motors. Third, identify any gaps between the current state and the required state. Fourth, evaluate different strategic approaches for bridging these gaps, considering their effectiveness, efficiency, and compliance implications. Finally, select and implement the most appropriate approach, ensuring ongoing monitoring and review. Question 9. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a proposed accounting treatment for certain research and development expenditures at Mitsubishi Motors could significantly reduce current period expenses, thereby boosting reported profitability. However, the accounting treatment is based on an aggressive interpretation of capitalization rules and lacks clear precedent within the company's established accounting policies. What is the most professionally responsible course of action for the finance department? Option A. Proceed with the proposed accounting treatment but disclose it prominently in the financial statements, assuming transparency negates any potential issues. Option B. Seek an external legal opinion to justify the proposed accounting treatment, regardless of its accounting merit. Option C. Implement the proposed accounting treatment as the cost-benefit analysis indicates a clear financial advantage for Mitsubishi Motors. Option D. Reject the proposed accounting treatment due to its aggressive interpretation of capitalization rules and lack of clear accounting support, prioritizing adherence to accounting standards and ethical principles. The correct answer is C. Implement the proposed accounting treatment as the cost-benefit analysis indicates a clear financial advantage for Mitsubishi Motors. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing potential business benefits against ethical considerations and regulatory compliance. Mitsubishi Motors, like any company, faces pressure to innovate and improve efficiency, but these efforts must not compromise the integrity of its financial reporting or mislead stakeholders. The core difficulty lies in discerning when a proposed accounting treatment, even if seemingly beneficial from a cost-benefit perspective, crosses the line into aggressive or improper accounting. Careful judgment is required to ensure that financial statements are a true and fair representation of the company's performance and position. The correct approach involves prioritizing adherence to accounting standards and ethical principles over short-term financial gains. This means scrutinizing the proposed accounting treatment to ensure it has a sound basis in generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP, or relevant international financial reporting standards, IFRS, depending on the jurisdiction specified for the Mitsubishi Motors hiring assessment test. If the proposed treatment is aggressive, lacks clear accounting support, or appears designed to manipulate earnings, it should be rejected. The justification for this approach is rooted in the fundamental ethical duty of accountants and financial professionals to maintain accuracy, transparency, and integrity in financial reporting. Regulatory frameworks, such as those overseen by the Financial Conduct Authority, FCA, in the UK, or the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, in the US, mandate compliance with accounting standards and prohibit fraudulent financial reporting. Upholding these standards builds trust with investors, creditors, and the public, which is crucial for the long-term sustainability of Mitsubishi Motors. An incorrect approach would be to adopt the proposed accounting treatment solely because the cost-benefit analysis suggests it will improve reported profits or reduce immediate costs, without a thorough assessment of its compliance with accounting standards. This could lead to misstated financial statements, which is a direct violation of regulatory requirements and ethical obligations. For instance, if the proposed treatment involves recognizing revenue prematurely or capitalizing expenses that should be recognized immediately, it would distort the company's financial performance. Such actions can result in regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and legal liabilities for Mitsubishi Motors. Another incorrect approach would be to proceed with the treatment based on a vague interpretation of accounting rules, or by relying on the opinion of a single individual, without seeking broader professional consensus or independent review. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the robust internal controls necessary for accurate financial reporting. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, thoroughly understand the proposed accounting treatment and its intended impact. Second, rigorously assess its compliance with all applicable accounting standards and relevant regulations. This may involve consulting with internal accounting experts, external auditors, or legal counsel. Third, consider the ethical implications and the potential impact on stakeholders. Fourth, document the decision-making process, including the rationale for accepting or rejecting the proposed treatment, to ensure accountability and transparency. If there is any doubt about the appropriateness of an accounting treatment, the principle of prudence should guide the decision towards the more conservative option. Question 10. System analysis indicates that a Mitsubishi Motors procurement manager has a close personal relationship with the owner of a potential supplier company. The procurement manager is responsible for evaluating bids and making recommendations for significant contracts. What is the most appropriate course of action for the procurement manager to ensure compliance with ethical standards and regulatory guidelines? Option A. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to their direct supervisor and the company's compliance department, and recuse themselves from all aspects of the supplier evaluation and selection process. Option B. Subtly steer the evaluation process to ensure the family member's company is favorably considered, without explicitly stating the relationship. Option C. Inform the family member about the bidding process and encourage them to submit a competitive bid, without mentioning their own involvement in the evaluation. Option D. Proceed with the evaluation of the supplier's bid as normal, assuming their professional judgment is not compromised by the personal relationship. The correct answer is A. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to their direct supervisor and the company's compliance department, and recuse themselves from all aspects of the supplier evaluation and selection process. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Mitsubishi Motors employee due to the potential for conflicts of interest and the need to uphold ethical standards and regulatory compliance. The core difficulty lies in balancing personal relationships with professional responsibilities, ensuring that decisions are made in the best interest of Mitsubishi Motors and its stakeholders, rather than being influenced by personal connections. Careful judgment is required to identify and manage these potential conflicts proactively. The correct approach involves a transparent and proactive disclosure of the relationship to the relevant internal authority, such as a compliance officer or HR department, and recusal from any decision-making processes that could directly or indirectly benefit the family member's business. This aligns with fundamental ethical principles of integrity and fairness, and regulatory frameworks that mandate the disclosure and management of conflicts of interest to prevent favoritism, ensure fair competition, and maintain public trust. By disclosing and recusing, the employee demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and adherence to Mitsubishi Motors' internal policies and any applicable industry regulations designed to prevent undue influence. An incorrect approach of proceeding with the business relationship without disclosure risks, violating internal company policies and potentially external regulations concerning conflicts of interest. This failure stems from a lack of transparency and an implicit endorsement of a potentially biased decision-making process. Another incorrect approach of subtly influencing the decision-making process to favor the family member's business, even without direct financial gain, constitutes a breach of professional duty and ethical conduct. This is because it undermines the principle of objective decision-making and can lead to suboptimal outcomes for Mitsubishi Motors. A third incorrect approach of denying the existence of the relationship when questioned, or downplaying its significance, is a direct act of dishonesty and a severe ethical and regulatory violation, eroding trust and potentially leading to significant legal and reputational damage for both the employee and Mitsubishi Motors. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, integrity, and adherence to established rules. This involves first identifying potential conflicts of interest, then assessing their severity and impact. The next step is to consult relevant company policies and regulatory guidelines. If a conflict exists, the professional should proactively disclose it to the appropriate authority and seek guidance on how to manage or mitigate it, which often involves recusal from relevant decisions. This systematic approach ensures that personal relationships do not compromise professional judgment or the integrity of business operations. Question 11. Benchmark analysis indicates that a recent internal audit at Mitsubishi Motors has uncovered a significant, previously undisclosed quality defect in a key component used across multiple vehicle models. This defect, while not immediately posing a safety risk, could lead to premature wear and potentially costly repairs for consumers in the medium term. Management is concerned about the impact on sales and stock price if this information becomes public. What is the most appropriate course of action for Mitsubishi Motors to take regarding this quality defect? Option A. Continue to monitor the defect internally and only disclose it if it escalates to a safety issue or if a significant number of customer complaints are received. Option B. Immediately disclose the quality defect to the relevant regulatory authorities and the public, outlining the nature of the defect and the planned remediation steps. Option C. Focus on developing a fix internally and inform the market only after the issue has been fully resolved and all affected vehicles have been repaired. Option D. Issue a general statement acknowledging potential long-term wear issues in certain components without specifying the exact defect or the affected models. The correct answer is B. Immediately disclose the quality defect to the relevant regulatory authorities and the public, outlining the nature of the defect and the planned remediation steps. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire to present a positive image and the ethical obligation to disclose material information accurately and transparently. Mitsubishi Motors, as a publicly traded entity, is subject to stringent regulatory requirements designed to protect investors and maintain market integrity. The challenge lies in navigating the pressure to downplay negative findings while upholding the duty of truthful reporting. Careful judgment is required to balance business interests with legal and ethical responsibilities. The correct approach involves immediate and transparent disclosure of the identified quality issue to the relevant regulatory bodies and the public, as required by applicable laws and ethical codes. This upholds the principle of investor protection and market fairness. By proactively reporting the issue, Mitsubishi Motors demonstrates its commitment to compliance and ethical conduct, which can mitigate long-term reputational damage and potential penalties. This aligns with the spirit of regulations that mandate timely and accurate disclosure of material information that could affect an investor's decision. An incorrect approach of delaying or omitting disclosure of the quality issue would constitute a serious regulatory and ethical failure. Such an action could be interpreted as misleading investors and the market, potentially violating securities laws and stock exchange listing rules. This failure to disclose material information erodes investor confidence and can lead to significant fines, legal action, and severe reputational harm. Another incorrect approach of attempting to rectify the issue internally without informing stakeholders, especially if the issue is material, also fails to meet disclosure obligations and could be seen as an attempt to conceal information. This undermines the principles of transparency and accountability fundamental to corporate governance and regulatory compliance. Professionals facing similar situations should employ a structured decision-making framework. This involves 1. Identifying the core ethical and regulatory obligations. 2. Assessing the materiality of the information in question. 3. Consulting relevant internal policies and external regulations. 4. Seeking advice from legal and compliance departments. 5. Prioritizing transparency and accuracy in all communications. 6. Documenting the decision-making process thoroughly. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are not only compliant but also ethically sound and in the best long-term interest of the company and its stakeholders. Question 12. Risk assessment procedures indicate that certain operational processes within Mitsubishi Motors may be inefficient. When considering process optimization, which of the following approaches best balances the pursuit of efficiency with the absolute priority of adhering to all relevant regulatory frameworks and ethical guidelines? Option A. Bypass established internal control procedures to expedite the implementation of new, more efficient workflows. Option B. Focus exclusively on identifying and eliminating any process steps that add to operational costs, regardless of their impact on reporting accuracy or regulatory adherence. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive review of existing processes, identify areas for improvement, and then design and implement optimized processes with integrated compliance checks and ethical considerations at every stage. Option D. Implement changes rapidly to achieve cost savings, with compliance reviews conducted only after the new processes are fully operational. The correct answer is D. Implement changes rapidly to achieve cost savings, with compliance reviews conducted only after the new processes are fully operational. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because Mitsubishi Motors, as a publicly listed company, operates within a highly regulated environment. Ensuring process optimization initiatives align with regulatory compliance and ethical standards is paramount to maintaining stakeholder trust and avoiding legal repercussions. The challenge lies in balancing efficiency gains with the absolute necessity of adhering to all applicable laws and guidelines, particularly those governing financial reporting and corporate governance. The correct approach involves a thorough review of existing processes to identify inefficiencies and potential improvements, followed by a structured implementation plan that explicitly incorporates compliance checks at each stage. This ensures that any optimization does not inadvertently lead to breaches of regulatory requirements or ethical misconduct. This approach is justified by the fundamental principle of regulatory compliance, which dictates that all business operations must adhere to the laws and guidelines set forth by relevant authorities. For Mitsubishi Motors, this would include any specific regulations governing the automotive industry, financial disclosures, and corporate conduct within its operating jurisdictions. Ethical considerations also demand transparency and integrity in all business dealings, which this structured, compliance-focused approach upholds. An incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of implementation over thorough compliance checks would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for regulatory frameworks, potentially leading to misstatements in financial reports, noncompliance with industry standards, or even fraudulent activities. Another incorrect approach, focusing solely on cost reduction without considering the impact on data integrity or reporting accuracy, also poses significant regulatory and ethical risks. Such an approach could lead to the adoption of processes that, while cheaper, compromise the reliability of information reported to stakeholders and regulators. A third incorrect approach, which involves bypassing established internal control procedures in the name of efficiency, directly violates principles of good corporate governance and increases the likelihood of errors or deliberate manipulation of data, thereby exposing Mitsubishi Motors to severe regulatory penalties and reputational damage. Professionals at Mitsubishi Motors should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the regulatory landscape. Before initiating any process optimization, they must identify all relevant laws, regulations, and internal policies. The next step is to assess the potential impact of proposed changes on compliance and ethical standards. This involves engaging with legal, compliance, and internal audit departments early in the process. Any proposed optimization should then be evaluated not only for its efficiency benefits, but also for its adherence to these identified requirements. A robust risk assessment should be conducted for each proposed change, with mitigation strategies developed for any identified compliance or ethical risks. Finally, ongoing monitoring and review mechanisms must be in place to ensure that optimized processes remain compliant and ethical over time. Question 13. Upon reviewing the current production line workflow at Mitsubishi Motors manufacturing facility, a team has identified several areas where efficiency could be improved. One proposal suggests significantly reducing the number of quality inspection points to speed up the assembly process and lower labor costs. Another suggests implementing a new automated system for a critical assembly step, but this system has not been fully tested in a real-world production environment. A third suggestion is to streamline the reporting procedures for minor deviations, allowing supervisors to approve them without detailed documentation to save administrative time. Which of these proposed approaches best aligns with a responsible and sustainable process optimization strategy for Mitsubishi Motors? Option A. Implementing a new automated system for a critical assembly step that has not been fully tested in a real-world production environment. Option B. Streamlining reporting procedures for minor deviations to save administrative time. Option C. A comprehensive review of the entire workflow, involving input from assembly line workers and quality control personnel, to identify and implement targeted improvements that maintain quality and compliance standards. Option D. Reducing the number of quality inspection points to speed up the assembly process and lower labor costs. Correct answer is B. Streamlining reporting procedures for minor deviations to save administrative time. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for efficiency with the long-term implications of process changes, particularly concerning compliance and employee well-being. Mitsubishi Motors, like any organization, operates within a framework of regulatory expectations and ethical considerations that govern how changes are implemented. A hasty or poorly considered approach to process optimization can lead to regulatory breaches, decreased employee morale, and ultimately, operational inefficiencies. The correct approach involves a systematic and collaborative method that prioritizes understanding the existing processes, identifying bottlenecks, and then designing and implementing solutions with stakeholder input. This ensures that changes are not only efficient, but also compliant with relevant regulations and sustainable in the long run. It acknowledges that employees are key stakeholders whose insights are invaluable and whose buy-in is crucial for successful implementation. This aligns with principles of good corporate governance and responsible operational management, which often implicitly or explicitly require due diligence, risk assessment, and stakeholder engagement in significant operational changes. An approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering the impact on operational integrity or regulatory adherence is fundamentally flawed. This could lead to shortcuts that violate industry standards or specific Mitsubishi Motors internal policies designed to ensure quality and compliance. For instance, eliminating steps in a quality control process without proper risk assessment could result in product defects, leading to regulatory penalties or reputational damage. Another incorrect approach is to implement changes without consulting the employees who perform the tasks. This not only breeds resentment and resistance, but also overlooks critical practical knowledge that could prevent unintended negative consequences. Regulations often emphasize fair treatment of employees and the importance of consultation, especially when changes affect working conditions or job roles. Ignoring this can lead to grievances and potential legal challenges. A third incorrect approach might be to adopt a one-size-fits-all solution without tailoring it to the specific context of Mitsubishi Motors operations. This demonstrates a lack of analytical rigor and an inability to adapt to the unique challenges and opportunities within the organization. Professional decision-making in process optimization requires a deep understanding of the specific business unit, its operational environment, and the relevant regulatory landscape, followed by a tailored, evidence-based solution. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Thorough analysis of the current state, including identifying pain points and inefficiencies. 2. Stakeholder engagement, particularly with frontline employees, to gather insights and build consensus. 3. Rigorous evaluation of potential solutions, considering their impact on efficiency, quality, compliance, and employee well-being. 4. Phased implementation with clear communication and feedback mechanisms. And 5. Continuous monitoring and refinement. Question 14. The risk matrix shows a high likelihood of a data privacy compliance breach for Mitsubishi Motors if customer data is used for sales and marketing analytics without proper anonymization. Which of the following implementation strategies best addresses this risk while enabling effective business operations? Option A. Implement strict data anonymization and aggregation techniques before utilizing customer data for sales and marketing analytics. Option B. Ignore the risk identified in the matrix, assuming current data handling practices are sufficient for compliance. Option C. Proceed with using raw customer data for analytics, relying on existing internal policies to manage privacy risks. Option D. Apply basic data masking to customer data, such as obscuring names, before using it for analytics. The correct answer is A. Implement strict data anonymization and aggregation techniques before utilizing customer data for sales and marketing analytics. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Mitsubishi Motors employees due to the inherent conflict between achieving business objectives and adhering to regulatory compliance. The risk matrix, a standard tool for identifying and prioritizing potential threats, highlights a significant compliance risk related to data privacy. The challenge lies in balancing the need for efficient data processing to support sales and marketing efforts with the stringent requirements of data protection laws. Employees must exercise careful judgment to ensure that business goals do not inadvertently lead to breaches of privacy regulations, which could result in severe penalties, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. The correct approach involves implementing robust data anonymization and aggregation techniques before data is used for analysis and reporting. This method directly addresses the identified risk by transforming personal data into a format where individuals cannot be identified. This aligns with the principles of data minimization and purpose limitation, which are fundamental to data protection regulations. By anonymizing and aggregating data, Mitsubishi Motors can still derive valuable insights for sales and marketing without compromising the privacy of its customers, thereby fulfilling its regulatory obligations and ethical responsibilities. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the analysis using raw customer data without adequate safeguards. This directly violates data protection principles by exposing personal information unnecessarily. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the risk identified in the matrix, assuming that current practices are sufficient. This demonstrates a failure to proactively manage compliance risks and a disregard for regulatory requirements. A third incorrect approach would be to implement superficial data masking techniques that do not truly anonymize the data, leaving individuals identifiable through re-identification methods. This would be a form of non-compliance, as it fails to meet the spirit and intent of data protection laws. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves a thorough understanding of applicable data protection laws, a commitment to risk assessment and mitigation, and the implementation of appropriate technical and organizational measures. When faced with a conflict between business objectives and compliance, the primary consideration must always be adherence to legal and ethical standards. This requires a proactive and diligent approach to data handling, ensuring that all business activities are conducted in a manner that respects individual privacy and upholds the company's integrity. Question 15. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing a new, less expensive component in the upcoming Mitsubishi Motors vehicle model could result in significant cost savings. However, preliminary internal testing has flagged a potential, albeit unconfirmed, risk of premature wear under extreme conditions, which could eventually impact a safety-related system. What is the most responsible course of action for Mitsubishi Motors to take regarding this component? Option A. Proceed with the less expensive component, as the risk is not definitively proven and the cost savings are substantial. Option B. Source a slightly more expensive but fully vetted component that has a proven track record of reliability for safety-related systems. Option C. Delay the product launch to conduct further rigorous testing and analysis of the component's long-term durability and potential safety implications, even if it incurs additional development costs and delays. Option D. Implement the less expensive component, but include a disclaimer in the owner's manual about potential wear under extreme conditions. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the less expensive component, as the risk is not definitively proven and the cost savings are substantial. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Mitsubishi Motors due to the inherent conflict between achieving cost efficiencies and upholding ethical standards in product development. The pressure to reduce expenses can tempt decision-makers to overlook potential risks or compromise on quality, which could have significant repercussions for consumer safety, brand reputation, and regulatory compliance. Careful judgment is required to balance financial objectives with the paramount duty to ensure product integrity and public well-being. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves prioritizing the thorough investigation of potential safety concerns identified during the cost-benefit analysis, even if it means incurring additional development costs or delaying the product launch. This aligns with the fundamental ethical obligation of manufacturers to produce safe products and adhere to regulatory requirements. Specifically, under the framework governing automotive manufacturing and consumer protection, there is an implicit and often explicit requirement to ensure that cost-saving measures do not compromise safety standards. This approach demonstrates a commitment to responsible corporate citizenship and proactive risk management, which is crucial for maintaining trust with consumers and regulatory bodies. Incorrect approach is analysis. Proceeding with the product launch without adequately addressing the identified potential safety issues, based solely on the cost-benefit analysis that favors cost reduction, represents a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This approach disregards the potential harm to consumers and the legal liabilities that could arise from a defective product. It violates the principle of prioritizing safety over profit and could lead to severe penalties, recalls, and reputational damage. Ignoring the potential safety concerns because they are not definitively proven to be a problem at this stage, but rather a possibility, is also an unacceptable approach. Regulatory frameworks often require a precautionary principle, meaning that even potential risks must be investigated and mitigated. Relying on the absence of definitive proof to justify an action is a failure to exercise due diligence and a disregard for consumer safety. Focusing exclusively on the immediate cost savings without a comprehensive assessment of the long-term implications, such as potential recall costs, legal fees, and brand erosion, is a short-sighted and irresponsible decision. This approach demonstrates a lack of strategic thinking and a failure to consider the broader impact on Mitsubishi Motors' sustainability and market standing. Professional reasoning. Professionals at Mitsubishi Motors should adopt a decision-making framework that integrates ethical considerations and regulatory compliance into every stage of product development. This involves 1. Proactive risk identification, continuously scanning for potential safety and compliance risks throughout the product lifecycle. 2. Comprehensive risk assessment, thoroughly evaluating the likelihood and impact of identified risks, including potential harm to consumers and regulatory consequences. 3. Ethical prioritization, ensuring that consumer safety and regulatory adherence are non-negotiable priorities, even when they conflict with cost-saving objectives. 4. Due diligence, conducting rigorous testing and investigation to validate or refute potential risks. 5. Transparent communication, maintaining open communication with relevant stakeholders, including regulatory bodies, regarding potential issues and mitigation strategies. 6. Long-term perspective, considering the long-term implications of decisions on brand reputation, customer loyalty, and financial sustainability. Question 16. Examination of the data shows that a new Mitsubishi Motors marketing campaign has generated a significant amount of customer contact information. While internal company guidelines suggest a broad use of this data for future promotional activities, a review of the relevant regulatory framework indicates stricter limitations on how such data can be collected, stored, and utilized, particularly concerning customer consent and data anonymization. The employee responsible for managing this data is unsure how to proceed. Option A. Ignore the discrepancy and continue with the marketing activities as planned, as the internal guidelines are generally followed by the company. Option B. Consult with a senior colleague in the marketing department for their opinion on how to best proceed with the customer data. Option C. Prioritize adherence to the stricter limitations outlined in the regulatory framework, even if it means modifying the planned marketing activities and seeking explicit customer consent where required. Option D. Proceed with the planned marketing activities as per internal company guidelines, assuming they represent the company's best practices for customer engagement. The correct answer is C. Prioritize adherence to the stricter limitations outlined in the regulatory framework, even if it means modifying the planned marketing activities and seeking explicit customer consent where required. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Mitsubishi Motors employee due to the potential conflict between internal company directives and external regulatory requirements. The employee must exercise careful judgment to ensure compliance and avoid reputational damage or legal repercussions for the company. The core of the challenge lies in interpreting and applying the relevant regulatory framework to a specific situation involving customer data. The correct approach involves prioritizing the regulatory framework over internal company guidelines when there is a conflict, especially concerning data privacy. This is because regulatory frameworks are legally binding and carry penalties for non-compliance. Adhering to the regulatory framework ensures that Mitsubishi Motors operates within the bounds of the law, protecting both the company and its customers. This approach demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and legal compliance, which are paramount in the automotive industry and any customer-facing business. An incorrect approach would be to strictly follow internal company guidelines if they contradict the regulatory framework. This failure stems from a misunderstanding or disregard for the legal supremacy of the regulatory framework. Such an action could lead to breaches of data protection laws, resulting in significant fines, legal action, and severe damage to Mitsubishi Motors' reputation. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the discrepancy and proceed without clarification. This inaction is also a failure, as it demonstrates a lack of diligence and responsibility in ensuring compliance, potentially exposing the company to risks it could have mitigated. A third incorrect approach might be to seek guidance solely from a colleague without verifying the information against the official regulatory framework. This relies on potentially incomplete or inaccurate advice, bypassing the established channels for ensuring regulatory adherence. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the relevant regulatory requirements. When faced with a conflict between internal policies and regulations, the regulatory framework must always take precedence. The next step is to seek clarification from the appropriate internal compliance or legal department to understand how to best implement the regulatory requirements within the company's operational context. Documenting all decisions and communications related to compliance is also crucial for accountability and future reference. Question 17. Assessment of the proposed operational efficiency improvements at Mitsubishi Motors, which involve streamlining supply chain logistics and reducing inventory levels, requires a thorough evaluation of potential impacts. Which of the following approaches best ensures that these efficiency measures are implemented in a manner that upholds regulatory compliance and ethical standards? Option A. Prioritizing the immediate cost savings identified by the efficiency proposals and deferring any detailed regulatory impact analysis until after implementation. Option B. Focusing solely on the financial projections and operational benefits of the efficiency measures, assuming that existing compliance frameworks will automatically accommodate the changes. Option C. Implementing the efficiency measures incrementally, with a plan to address any regulatory issues that may arise on a case-by-case basis as they become apparent. Option D. Conducting a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies potential regulatory noncompliance and ethical concerns arising from the proposed changes, and developing mitigation strategies before implementation. The correct answer is A. Prioritizing the immediate cost savings identified by the efficiency proposals and deferring any detailed regulatory impact analysis until after implementation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual at Mitsubishi Motors to balance the immediate need for cost reduction with the long-term implications of regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. Pressure to cut expenses can create a temptation to overlook or downplay potential risks, especially those that are not immediately quantifiable or apparent. Careful judgment is required to ensure that cost-saving measures do not inadvertently lead to breaches of regulatory requirements or ethical standards. The correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that considers all potential impacts of the proposed cost-saving measures on regulatory compliance, operational integrity, and stakeholder trust. This approach prioritizes a thorough understanding of the regulatory landscape relevant to Mitsubishi Motors operations and the ethical obligations of the company and its employees. By systematically identifying, analyzing, and evaluating risks, and then developing appropriate mitigation strategies, this approach ensures that cost reductions are achieved responsibly and sustainably, without compromising legal or ethical standing. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and responsible business practice, which are implicitly or explicitly mandated by regulatory frameworks governing automotive manufacturers and publicly traded companies. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the immediate financial benefits of the proposed changes, without adequately considering regulatory implications, represents a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This could lead to noncompliance with industry-specific regulations, e.g., related to emissions, safety, or data privacy, resulting in fines, reputational damage, and potential legal action. Another incorrect approach that involves deferring risk assessment until after the cost-saving measures have been implemented is also professionally unacceptable. This reactive stance increases the likelihood of unforeseen problems and makes remediation more difficult and costly. It demonstrates a lack of proactive risk management and a disregard for the principle of due diligence, which is a cornerstone of regulatory compliance and ethical business operations. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with understanding the objectives and constraints, including regulatory requirements and ethical considerations. This framework should involve gathering relevant information, identifying potential risks and benefits associated with different courses of action, evaluating these risks against established criteria, including legal and ethical standards, and selecting the option that best balances objectives while minimizing undue risk. Regular review and adaptation of this process are crucial to maintain effectiveness in a dynamic environment. Question 18. Which approach would be most appropriate for a Mitsubishi Motors sales representative when a potential customer expresses uncertainty about the long-term maintenance cost of a particular model, while the sales representative is under pressure to meet quarterly sales targets? Option A. Briefly mention that maintenance is standard and focus the conversation on the vehicle's performance and features to steer the customer away from cost-related discussions. Option B. Suggest that the customer research maintenance costs independently and return when they have a clearer understanding, even if it means losing the immediate sale. Option C. Emphasize the immediate savings and attractive financing options available for the model, suggesting that maintenance costs are a minor concern compared to the current affordability. Option D. Proactively provide detailed information on typical maintenance schedules, potential costs for common services, and available extended warranty options, while clearly explaining that these are estimates and actual costs can vary. The correct answer is D. Proactively provide detailed information on typical maintenance schedules, potential costs for common services, and available extended warranty options, while clearly explaining that these are estimates and actual costs can vary. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Mitsubishi Motors employees due to the inherent conflict between achieving sales targets and adhering to ethical sales practices, particularly when dealing with potentially vulnerable customers. The pressure to meet quotas can incentivize aggressive or misleading sales tactics, which can lead to customer dissatisfaction, reputational damage for Mitsubishi Motors, and potential regulatory scrutiny. Careful judgment is required to balance business objectives with the imperative to act with integrity and in the best interests of the customer. The correct approach involves prioritizing customer understanding and informed consent above immediate sales closure. This means actively listening to customer concerns, clearly explaining the features and benefits of vehicles, and ensuring that any financing or lease agreements are fully understood by the customer before they commit. This aligns with the principles of fair dealing and consumer protection, which are fundamental to maintaining trust and a positive brand image for Mitsubishi Motors. Regulatory frameworks often emphasize transparency and preventing misrepresentation in sales, making this approach not only ethical but also compliant. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on closing the sale without ensuring customer comprehension risks misrepresentation and potentially predatory sales practices. This could violate consumer protection laws that mandate clear and accurate information disclosure. Another incorrect approach, which involves downplaying or omitting information about potential drawbacks or costs associated with a vehicle, directly contravenes ethical obligations to be truthful and transparent. Such actions can lead to breaches of contract, customer complaints, and regulatory investigations into unfair or deceptive trade practices. A third incorrect approach, which involves pressuring customers into decisions they are not comfortable with, undermines the principle of informed consent and can be seen as coercive, leading to significant reputational and legal repercussions for Mitsubishi Motors. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the core ethical and regulatory obligations relevant to their role. This involves a commitment to honesty, transparency, and fairness in all customer interactions. When faced with competing pressures, such as sales targets, professionals should ask themselves if their proposed actions would withstand public scrutiny, and if they are acting in a way that builds long-term customer loyalty and trust. This proactive ethical consideration, coupled with a thorough understanding of relevant consumer protection guidelines, is crucial for navigating complex sales environments responsibly. Question 19. Implementation of a new assembly line process at Mitsubishi Motors aims to increase production output by 15%. Which of the following approaches best balances efficiency gains with regulatory compliance and ethical considerations? Option A. Focus exclusively on the cost-saving aspects of the new process, assuming that any regulatory or ethical implications will be addressed by the relevant departments as a secondary concern. Option B. Prioritize the fastest implementation of the new process to meet the output target, deferring any potential compliance checks to a later date. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive review of the proposed process changes, assessing their impact on environmental regulations, product safety standards, and labor practices before phased implementation. Option D. Immediately implement the proposed changes based on the projected output increase, assuming existing quality control measures are sufficient. The correct answer is D. Immediately implement the proposed changes based on the projected output increase, assuming existing quality control measures are sufficient. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing efficiency gains with the imperative to maintain compliance and ethical conduct within the automotive manufacturing sector, specifically for Mitsubishi Motors. The pressure to optimize processes can sometimes lead to shortcuts that inadvertently violate regulatory frameworks or ethical standards. Careful judgment is required to ensure that improvements do not compromise product safety, environmental regulations, or fair labor practices. The correct approach involves a systematic review of existing processes, identifying bottlenecks and inefficiencies, and then proposing solutions that are vetted against current Mitsubishi Motors' internal policies and relevant regulatory requirements. This approach prioritizes a thorough understanding of the current state before implementing changes, ensuring that any proposed optimization is both effective and compliant. Specifically, this aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and operational integrity expected of a global automotive manufacturer like Mitsubishi Motors. Regulatory frameworks often mandate robust internal controls and risk management processes, which this systematic review directly supports. Ethically, it demonstrates a commitment to responsible business practices by not sacrificing compliance for speed. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering regulatory impact would fail to uphold Mitsubishi Motors' obligations under environmental protection laws, potentially leading to fines or reputational damage. Another incorrect approach that bypasses established quality control procedures in the name of speed risks compromising vehicle safety and reliability, violating consumer protection regulations, and potentially leading to product recalls. A third incorrect approach that involves implementing changes without adequate employee training or consultation could lead to operational errors, safety incidents, and breaches of labor laws or internal HR policies, undermining the very efficiency it seeks to achieve. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of objectives, followed by a comprehensive assessment of potential impacts, including regulatory, ethical, and operational considerations. This involves consulting relevant internal policies, legal counsel, and compliance departments before finalizing any process changes. A risk-based approach, where potential negative outcomes are identified and mitigated, is crucial. Question 20. Compliance review shows potential deviations from established environmental reporting standards in Mitsubishi Motors' recent manufacturing processes. Which of the following approaches best addresses this finding to ensure ongoing regulatory adherence and mitigate potential risks? Option A. Defer any action until a formal inquiry is initiated by regulatory bodies, as proactive measures might be perceived as an admission of guilt and could lead to unnecessary complications. Option B. Conduct a thorough impact assessment to understand the scope of the deviations, identify specific regulatory breaches, and determine potential consequences before implementing corrective actions. Option C. Focus solely on the financial implications of the reporting deviations, prioritizing cost-effective solutions that minimize immediate expenditure without a comprehensive evaluation of regulatory or environmental risks. Option D. Immediately implement minor procedural adjustments to reporting to align with perceived best practices, assuming the deviations are insignificant and unlikely to attract regulatory scrutiny. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough impact assessment to understand the scope of the deviations, identify specific regulatory breaches, and determine potential consequences before implementing corrective actions. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for operational efficiency with the long-term imperative of maintaining regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. Mitsubishi Motors, like any automotive manufacturer, operates within a complex web of regulations designed to ensure product safety, environmental protection, and fair business practices. A compliance review highlighting potential issues necessitates a proactive and thorough response, rather than a reactive or dismissive one. The challenge lies in accurately assessing the severity of the identified issues and implementing appropriate corrective actions without causing undue disruption or compromising integrity. The correct approach involves a comprehensive impact assessment that meticulously evaluates the potential consequences of the identified compliance gaps. This includes understanding the scope of the noncompliance, the specific regulations or guidelines that have been potentially breached, and the potential ramifications for Mitsubishi Motors. This approach is professionally sound because it aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and risk management. Regulatory frameworks, such as those governing product safety and environmental standards, mandate that companies identify and address compliance failures. Ethically, it demonstrates a commitment to operating responsibly and protecting stakeholders, including customers, employees, and the environment. A thorough impact assessment provides the necessary foundation for informed decision-making regarding remediation strategies, resource allocation, and communication. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate cost savings over a full assessment would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for the potential downstream consequences of noncompliance, which can include significant fines, reputational damage, product recalls, and even legal action. Such an approach violates the spirit and letter of most regulatory frameworks, which expect due diligence and proactive risk mitigation. Another incorrect approach, that of downplaying the findings without a proper investigation, is equally problematic. This demonstrates a lack of professional integrity and a failure to uphold the company's responsibility to comply with applicable laws and standards. It creates an environment where compliance issues can fester and escalate, leading to more severe problems in the future. Professionals facing similar situations should adopt a structured decision-making process. This begins with acknowledging the findings of the compliance review and treating them with seriousness. The next step is to initiate a detailed impact assessment, gathering all relevant information about the nature and extent of the potential noncompliance. This assessment should involve relevant internal departments, e.g., legal, compliance, engineering, operations, and potentially external experts. Based on the findings of the impact assessment, a risk-based approach should be employed to prioritize remediation efforts. Finally, a clear action plan should be developed and implemented, with ongoing monitoring to ensure its effectiveness and to prevent recurrence. This systematic process ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with both regulatory requirements and ethical obligations.